The snowflakes fell like whispered secrets across the Montana plains, each one carrying the weight of winter's harsh judgment. In the distance, a lone figure on horseback moved slowly through the white expanse, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. What Garrett McKinnon would discover that morning would change not just his own life, but the lives of strangers who had given up all hope. The wind had been howling for 3 days straight, turning the world into a blur of white and gray. Garrett pulled his worn leather coat tighter around his shoulders as his horse, Thunder, picked his way carefully through the deepening drifts. He had been riding fence for the Circle Bar Ranch, checking for breaks in the line that separated civilized land from the wild country beyond. At 32, Garrett had seen his share of hard winters, but this one felt different. There was a bite to the cold that seemed to reach right through a man's bones and settle in his soul, the kind of cold that made even the strongest folks question their will to keep going. Thunder's ears suddenly pricked forward, and the horse let out a soft whinny. Garrett straightened in his saddle, scanning the landscape ahead. That's when he saw a thin wisp of smoke rising from behind a stand of bare cottonwoods about a quarter-mile off the main trail. "Easy, boy," Garrett murmured, patting Thunder's neck. In country like this, smoke usually meant one of two things. Either someone was camping, or someone was in trouble. Given the storm that had been raging, Garrett figured it was probably the latter. He guided Thunder toward the smoke, the horse's hooves crunching through the snow with a steady rhythm. As they drew closer, Garrett could make out the outline of a small cabin tucked between the trees. It wasn't much more than a shack, really rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss, a roof that looked like it might not survive another heavy snowfall. The cabin sat in a clearing that had once been a homestead. Garrett could see the remnants of what might have been a garden, now buried under 2 feet of snow. A broken-down wagon sat near what used to be a corral, its wheels half buried, and its bed filled with white powder. As Thunder carried him closer, Garrett's experienced eye took in the details. No smoke coming from the chimney now, though he'd seen it moments before. No movement around the place, no sounds except the wind whistling through the bare branches overhead. He dismounted about 20 yards from the cabin, looping Thunder's reins around a sturdy branch. The snow crunched under his boots as he approached the front door, his hand resting instinctively on the grip of his pistol, not because he expected trouble, but because a man learned to be cautious in wild country. "Hello, the cabin," Garrett called out, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. It was the polite way to announce yourself, giving folks inside a chance to respond before you got too close. Silence. Then, just as Garrett was about to call out again, he heard something that made his blood run cold. It was the sound of a baby crying thin, weak, and desperate. Without hesitation, Garrett strode to the door and knocked firmly. "Ma'am, sir, is everything all right in there?" The crying stopped abruptly, as if someone had quickly moved to quiet the child. Then came a voice, so soft Garrett almost missed it over the wind. Double quotes, "Please, go away." It was a woman's voice, strained and exhausted. Garrett frowned, pressing his ear closer to the door. "Ma'am, I heard a baby crying. Are you folks all right? Do you need help?" A long pause. Then, we're fine. Just please leave us be." But even as she said it, the baby started crying again. And this time Garrett could hear the weakness in those small cries. He'd been around enough livestock to know what starvation sounded like, and that baby was hungry. "Ma'am, my name is Garrett McKinnon. I work for the Circle Bar Ranch about 15 miles south of here. I'm not looking to cause any trouble, but that little one sounds like he needs help." Another long silence. Garrett waited patiently, knowing that trust was something that had to be earned, especially from folks who were clearly at the end of their rope. Finally, he heard the scrape of wood against wood, and the door opened just a crack. Through the narrow opening, Garrett could see one pale blue eye and a strand of brown hair. You really work for the Circle Bar?" the woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. Been there going on 8 years now. Know the owner, Samuel Hutchins, since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. You can ask anyone in town." The door opened a little wider, and Garrett got his first real look at the woman inside. She was young, maybe 25, with light brown hair that had seen better days and clothes that were clean but patched in several places. But it was her eyes that struck him most. They held the kind of desperate fear that came from being pushed to the very edge of survival. "I'm Catherine Walsh," she said, still keeping the door mostly closed between them. "This is my cabin. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Walsh. Is your husband around?" Catherine's face crumpled slightly, and she shook her head. Thomas died 2 months ago. Fever took him fast." Garrett felt his heart sink. A woman alone with a baby, in the middle of nowhere, in the worst winter anyone could remember. "I'm real sorry for your loss, ma'am. The baby's crying grew louder, more insistent, and Catherine's grip on the door tightened. I should tend to him. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, when's the last time you folks had a proper meal? Catherine's face flushed red, and she looked down at her feet. The silence stretched between them, and Garrett had his answer. Listen, Mrs. Walsh, I've got some supplies with me. Trail rations, jerky, some hardtack. Nothing fancy, but it's food. Would you let me share it with you and your little one? Catherine's voice caught in her throat. I can't pay you for it. I'm not asking you to pay me, ma'am. Sometimes folks just help folks because it's the right thing to do. The baby's crying was getting weaker now, which worried Garrett more than if it had stayed strong. He'd heard that sound before, from calves whose mothers couldn't produce enough milk. Time was running short. Mrs. Walsh, I'm going to step back to my horse and get those supplies. You think about it while I'm doing that. All right. Catherine nodded wordlessly and closed the door. Garrett walked back to Thunder, his mind racing. The woman was clearly starving, and from the sound of it, so was her baby, but he could see the pride in her eyes, the shame that came from having to accept charity from a stranger. He pulled his saddlebags down and sorted through his supplies. He had enough jerky to last him another week, some hardtack biscuits, and a small bag of coffee beans. Not much, but it would keep them going for a few days at least. When Garrett returned to the cabin, he found the door slightly ajar. Catherine was sitting on a rough wooden chair just inside, holding a bundle of blankets that must have been her baby. Even in the dim light, Garrett could see how thin she'd become, how her clothes hung loose on her frame. May I come in, ma'am? Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. Garrett stepped inside and immediately understood why she'd been so hesitant to let him in. The cabin was clean but almost completely empty. A small bed in one corner, a table made from rough boards, 2 chairs, and a stone fireplace with no fire burning in it. That was it. Where's your woodpile, Mrs. Walsh? Used the last of it 3 days ago, Catherine admitted, her voice barely audible. Garrett nodded and set his saddlebags on the table. Well, first things first. Let me get a fire going, then we'll see about getting some food in you both. He spent the next hour gathering deadfall from the woods around the cabin, breaking it into manageable pieces, and getting a proper fire started in the hearth. Catherine watched him work, still holding her baby close, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might make him disappear like a mirage. Once the fire was crackling warmly, Garrett unpacked his supplies. The jerky was tough, but nutritious. The hardtack biscuits could be softened in water to make them easier to eat. And the coffee. Well, hot coffee could work wonders for a person's spirits. Ma'am, when's the last time you had anything to drink? Water, I mean. Catherine gestured weakly toward a bucket near the door. Been melting snow, but the bucket's got a hole in the bottom. Loses most of it before I can drink much. Garrett examined the bucket and found the problem a crack in the wood that had widened in the cold. He pulled out his knife and cut a strip of leather from his belt, using it to bind the crack tight. That should hold for a while, he said, filling the bucket with clean snow and setting it near the fire to melt. As the cabin warmed up and the smell of food began to fill the air, Catherine finally relaxed enough to tell her story. She and Thomas had come west from Ohio, drawn by the promise of free land and a fresh start. They'd built the cabin themselves, cleared some land for farming, and for a while it had seemed like their dreams might actually come true. Then Thomas got sick. At first, it seemed like just a cold, but it quickly turned into something much worse. By the time Catherine realized how serious it was, they were snowed in. With no way to get to town for help, he died on a Tuesday morning, Catherine said, staring into the fire. I dug the grave myself. Took me 3 days because the ground was so hard. The baby stirred in her arms, and Catherine looked down at him with a mixture of love and desperation. This is Henry. He's 4 months old now. I've been trying to keep him fed, but my milk, double quotes, she trailed off, embarrassed. Garrett understood. A starving mother couldn't produce enough milk to keep a baby healthy. It was a cruel fact of nature, but a fact nonetheless. How long since you've had a proper meal, Mrs. Walsh? I've been making what we had last as long as possible. A little bit each day, just enough to keep going. But yesterday, double quotes, she shook her head. Yesterday I ate the last of the flour. I made it into a thin gruel for Henry, but there wasn't enough. Garrett felt anger rising in his chest, not at Catherine, but at the circumstances that had brought her to this point. Here was a woman who had worked hard, loved deeply, and tried to do everything right, and life had still dealt her the cruelest possible hand. Well, he said, keeping his voice gentle, let's see about changing that right now. He prepared the food carefully, softening the hardtack in warm water until it formed a kind of porridge, seasoning it with small pieces of jerky to make it more nutritious. For Catherine, he prepared a simple but nourishing soup, using melted snow, pieces of jerky, and some wild onions he'd found growing near the cabin. Catherine ate slowly at first, as if she couldn't quite believe the food was real, but as her stomach began to accept the nourishment, she ate with increasing hunger, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered between bites. "I was starting to think, Don't think about that," Garrett said firmly. "You're going to be all right now." But even as he said it, Garrett knew that one meal wasn't going to solve Catherine's problems. Winter was far from over, and she had no way to support herself and her baby. The nearest town was 25 miles away, and even if she could make the journey, what would she do there? A woman alone with a baby had few options in 1887. As the evening wore on, Garrett found himself studying Catherine more closely. Beneath the exhaustion and desperation, he could see that she was intelligent, resourceful, and strong. She'd survived 2 months alone in the wilderness, keeping herself and her baby alive through the worst winter in memory. That took a special kind of courage. Henry had quieted down after his mother had eaten, apparently sensing that help had finally arrived. Catherine held him close, humming a soft lullaby that filled the warming cabin with a gentle peace. "Mrs. Walsh," Garrett said carefully, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but do you have any family back east? Anyone who might help you?" Catherine shook her head. "Thomas and I, we were both orphans. That's part of why we came west to build something of our own. Since we didn't have anything to inherit." Garrett nodded thoughtfully. He'd been turning over an idea in his mind for the last hour, and the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. "Ma'am, I know we just met, and I know this might sound forward, but I've got a proposition for you." Catherine looked up at him warily. "What kind of proposition?" "The Circle Bar Ranch is a big operation. Samuel Hutchins, the owner, he's got a main house that's bigger than he knows what to do with. His wife died 5 years ago, and his children are all grown and moved to California. He's been saying for months that the place feels too empty. I'm not sure I understand. Well, the ranch always needs help. We've got a housekeeper, Mary Peterson, but she's getting on in years and could use some assistance. And Samuel, he's mentioned more than once that he misses having young folks around the place." Catherine frowned. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a chance," Garrett said. "Room and board for you and Henry, plus wages for helping around the house. Samuel's a good man, fair, honest, and he's got a soft spot for folks who've fallen on hard times, but you don't even know me. Why would you? Why would you do this?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "My mother died when I was 8, he said finally. "Consumption took her in the middle of winter, much like this one. My father tried to keep me fed and clothed, but he was a cowboy, always traveling, always working. We ended up at the Circle Bar Ranch, both of us desperate and with nowhere else to go." He looked up at Catherine, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Samuel Hutchins took us in without question, gave my father work, gave me a home, made sure I went to school in town during the winters. When my father passed on 10 years ago, Samuel could have let me go. Instead, he made me his foreman." Catherine listened intently, beginning to understand. "I reckon I owe it to Samuel to pay forward the kindness he showed me," Garrett continued. "And I reckon you and Henry deserve the same chance my father and I got. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything tonight. Just think about it. But Mrs. Walsh, I want you to know that this isn't charity. Samuel really could use the help, and from what I've seen of you, you're exactly the kind of person he'd want working for him that night." Garrett slept on the floor near the fire while Catherine and Henry took the bed. It wasn't the most comfortable night he'd ever spent, but every time he woke up and heard the baby breathing peacefully, he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. In the morning, Catherine had made her decision. "Mr. McKinnon," she said as they shared a simple breakfast, "if Mr. Hutchins is willing to give me a chance, I'd be grateful to take it." "Good," Garrett said, smiling. "We'll head out this morning, if you're up to it. It's a long ride, but thunder's strong enough to carry all 3 of us, and the weather's clearing." They spent an hour packing Catherine's few belongings, some clothes, a few personal items that had belonged to her and Thomas, and a small wooden box that she clutched protectively. "What's in there?" Garrett asked gently. Catherine opened the box to reveal a collection of pressed flowers, a few letters, and a small daguerreotype photograph. "It's all I have left of Thomas," she said. "The flowers are from our wedding bouquet. The letters are ones he wrote me when he was courting me back in Ohio." "Those are precious things," Garrett said. "We'll make sure they stay safe." Before they left, Garrett walked Catherine to a small grave behind the cabin. Someone had placed a rough wooden cross there, and even under the snow, it was clear that the site had been tended with care. Catherine knelt by the grave, holding Henry close. "I'm leaving now, Thomas," she whispered, "but I'll never forget you, and I'll make sure Henry knows what a good man his father was." The ride to the Circle Bar Ranch took most of the day, but the weather held clear and cold. Catherine rode behind Garrett, holding Henry bundled warmly against her chest. They stopped frequently to rest and to make sure the baby was staying warm. As they rode, Garrett told Catherine more about the ranch and about Samuel Hutchins. He was a man in his 60s, Garrett explained, who had built the Circle Bar from nothing over the course of 30 years. He was known throughout the territory for his fairness and his generosity, but also for his high standards and his expectation that everyone pulled their own weight. "He's not going to coddle you," Garrett warned. "Samuel believes that the best way to help someone is to give them meaningful work and the tools to succeed. But if you're willing to work hard and prove yourself, there's no better man to work for." "I understand," Catherine said. "I'm not afraid of hard work. Thomas and we built that cabin with our own hands, cleared the land ourselves. I know what it means to earn your keep." As the sun was beginning to set, they crested a hill and Catherine got her first look at the Circle Bar Ranch. It was bigger than she had imagined. Sprawling complex of buildings centered around a large house built of white-painted wood and fields. There were barns, corrals, bunkhouses for the cowboys, and various outbuildings stretching across the valley floor. "It's beautiful," Catherine breathed. "Wait until you see it in spring," Garrett said. "When the grass is green and the wildflowers are blooming, it's about the prettiest sight you'll ever see." Samuel Hutchins was waiting on the front porch as they rode up, alerted by the sound of Thunder's hooves on the frozen ground. He was a tall, lean man with silver hair and kind blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Garrett," he said, stepping down to meet them. "You're later than I expected." "Yes, sir. Had some business to attend to along the way." Garrett dismounted and helped Catherine down, being careful not to jostle the baby. Samuel's eyes took in Catherine's appearance, her thin frame, her patched clothes, the way she held her child protectively, and his expression softened with understanding. "And who might this be?" he asked gently. "Mr. Hutchins, I'd like you to meet Catherine Walsh and her son Henry. Mrs. Walsh recently lost her husband, and they've been having a hard time of it through the winter." Samuel nodded, his experienced eyes seeing what Garrett was really telling him. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm sorry for your loss. Would you and young Henry like to come inside where it's warm?" "Thank you," Catherine said quietly. "That would be very kind." Thank you," Catherine said quietly. "That would be very kind." They went into the house, which was indeed as large and comfortable as Garrett had promised. The main room had a huge stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and warm rugs covering polished wooden floors. It was the kind of home Catherine had dreamed of having someday. Mary Peterson, the housekeeper, appeared from the kitchen, a plump, motherly woman in her 50s with graying hair and a warm smile. She took one look at Catherine and Henry and immediately went into action, bustling around to prepare food and hot drinks. "Land sakes," Mary muttered, "that baby needs feeding, and you look like you could use some fattening up yourself, dear." Over dinner, Catherine told her story again, this time with more detail and less embarrassment. Samuel listened carefully, asking occasional questions, but mostly just letting her talk. When she was finished, he sat back in his chair and studied her thoughtfully. "Mrs. Walsh, Garrett tells me you might be interested in helping out around here." "Yes, sir. I'm a hard worker and I learn quickly." "I'm sure you are, but I want to be clear about what I'm offering. This isn't a temporary arrangement or an act of charity. If you come to work for the Circle Bar, I'll expect you to earn your wages just like everyone else. Is that understood?" Catherine straightened in her chair, and for the first time since Garrett had met her, he saw a flash of the strength that had kept her and Henry alive through 2 months of hell. "Yes, sir, it is. I wouldn't want it any other way." Samuel smiled. "Good. Then let's talk specifics." The arrangement they worked out was fair and practical. Catherine would help Mary with the housework, cooking, and general maintenance of the big house. She would also assist with the ranch's bookkeeping. Samuel had noticed her neat handwriting and quick mind with numbers. In return, she and Henry would have a comfortable room in the main house, all meals provided, and a salary that would allow her to save money for the future. "There's just one more thing," Samuel said as they were finishing up the details. "This is a working ranch, and we keep early hours. Breakfast is at 5:30, and the day starts right after that. Can you manage that with a baby?" Catherine looked down at Henry, who had fallen asleep in her arms after a good feeding. "I'll manage, Mr. Hutchins, whatever it takes." That first spring at the Circle Bar was a time of healing and growth for Catherine and Henry. Catherine threw herself into her work with a determination that impressed everyone who knew her. She was up before dawn every day, helping Mary prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, and she didn't stop until evening. But more than just working hard, Catherine proved herself to be genuinely valuable. She had a gift for organization that brought new efficiency to the household. Her bookkeeping was meticulous and accurate, and she had a natural warmth that made the big house feel more like a home again. Henry thrived in the stable, loving environment. He grew plump and healthy, his laugh echoing through the halls of the house and bringing smiles to the faces of even the toughest cowboys. Garrett found himself stopping by the main house more often than necessary, always finding some excuse to check on Catherine and Henry. He told himself he was just making sure they were settling in all right. But Mary Peterson wasn't fooled. "That young man's sweet on you," she told Catherine one afternoon as they watched Garrett teaching Henry to clap his hands. "Don't be silly," Catherine said, but her cheeks turned pink. "Honey, I've been watching men longer than you've been alive. Garrett McKinnon looks at you like the sun rises and sets in your smile." As summer turned to fall, Catherine began to realize that Mary might be right. Garrett was always kind, always respectful, but there was something in his eyes when he looked at her that made her heart beat a little faster. And if she was honest with herself, she was beginning to have feelings for him too. The realization scared her. She had loved Thomas deeply, and part of her felt guilty for even thinking about another man. But Thomas was gone, and she was still alive. More than that, she was happy for the first time in over a year. The turning point came on a crisp October evening. Catherine had put Henry to bed and was sitting on the front porch, enjoying the peaceful sunset. Garrett found her there, as she had somehow known he would. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "I'd like that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Finally, Garrett spoke. "Catherine, I want to ask you something, but I don't want you to feel pressured to answer right away." Catherine's heart started beating faster, but she kept her voice calm. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about this for months now, and I keep coming to the same conclusion. You and Henry, you've become important to me, more important than I ever expected." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious and earnest. "I know it hasn't been that long since Thomas passed, and I know you might not be ready to think about such things, but Catherine, I love you, and I love Henry like he was my own son." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Garrett ... I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow," Garrett continued quickly. "I'm just asking you to think about the possibility, about whether you might someday want to build a life with me." Catherine was quiet for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. The loss, the desperation, the unexpected kindness of strangers who had become family, and now the possibility of love, again, of a future she had never dared to imagine. "I do love you, Garrett," she said finally. "I think I have 4 months now, but I need you to understand something. I will always love Thomas. He was my first love and Henry's father, and nothing will ever change that." "I wouldn't want it to change," Garrett said. "Thomas was a good man, and he deserves to be remembered and honored. If we build a life together, it won't be in competition with what you had with him. It'll be something new and different." Catherine reached over and took his hand. "In that case, yes, I would like to think about building a life with you." They were married the following spring, on a warm May afternoon with the whole ranch in attendance. Samuel walked Catherine down the aisle, beaming with pride as if she were his own daughter. Mary Peterson cried through the entire ceremony, and Henry, now walking and chattering constantly, charmed everyone by trying to help with the ring ceremony. As Catherine and Garrett exchanged vows in the little church in town, Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year and a half ago, she had been alone and starving, convinced that she and her baby were going to die in that cold cabin. But sometimes, she reflected, the worst moments in life are just God's way of making room for the best ones. The desperation that had brought Garrett to her door had also brought her to this new life, this new love, this new beginning. After the ceremony, as the celebration continued late into the evening, Garrett pulled Catherine aside for a quiet moment. "Any regrets?" he asked, smiling. Catherine looked around at their friends and family, Samuel, who had given them a new start, Mary, who had become like a mother to her, the cowboys who had welcomed her as one of their own, and Henry, now toddling around the dance floor and giggling with delight. "Not a single one," she said, standing on her toes to kiss her new husband. "Not a single one." And as the stars came out over the Montana sky, Catherine McKinnon knew that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the words, "I need help," because it takes courage to ask for help, wisdom to offer it, and love to make it last a lifetime. The winter winds still blow cold across the Montana plains, but in the warm glow of the Circle Bar Ranch, 3 lives had found their way home, and if you listen carefully on quiet nights, you might still hear the echo of a baby's laughter, carried on the wind like a promise that even in the darkest times, hope can find a way to survive. The end.